That man and his manga. Ah, food, glorious food, all the more to eat. But how does food go from this to this? Perhaps manga will explain. I have even more questions now. If only there was somebody who could teach me how to cook. If only. Not her. Hello and welcome to That Chef and his cooking. Home of the Isekai sandwich. And today I'm going to show you how to cook with manga. Food manga. A fun little subset of manga that once I started looking into it, I found so many fun titles. Food manga comes in all sorts of interesting shapes and sizes, much like food itself. Today we'll be looking at a number of food manga and seeing what they can serve up. First up, we are raiding the Shonen Jump Vault with what I'd say is the most well-known food manga. Food Wars. Shokogeki no Soma. No. It's not a bunch of cabbages fighting loaves of bread. This title tells the story of a young man named Soma, who aspires to one day take over his father's family restaurant, surpassing him. However, he winds up in Totsuki Sario Culinary Institute, an elite culinary school where students engage in food fights, known as Shokogeki. Shokogeki'd. Punk. Honestly, this was the series that really got me into food series on a whole, and it's not surprising why. It's your typical shonen story, only rather than overpowered fights and demon slaying, you instead get battles of the best dish. It even manages to make the dreaded tournament arc into something more palatable. As with most food manga, the homework has been done with this one, boasting an incredible amount of dishes from a wide variety of cultures. I really appreciated how each of the characters introduced focuses on a different aspect of preparing and cooking food. You have characters who specialise in spices, others who focus on smoking, and even one who focuses on the raising of animals. This character in particular, Ikumi Mito, she focuses on meat. Don't you just get it? I mean, her name's Mito. That sounds like meat, and she's supposed to be sizzling hot. And you know, do you get it? Do you get the joke? Do you get it? It's probably now that we should mention the food porn aspect of Food Wars. Probably the thing it's most well known for, if nothing else. Food Wars boasts a tremendous amount of food porn energy, not only in its depiction of food, but also in the reactions of the characters themselves. Nearly all of the meals look absolutely drool-worthy, and I can admit that often I'd be reading and my stomach would growl, wanting the food itself. And then the characters would eat the food, and their clothes would explode in orgasmic bliss. Combining the food and ecchi parts, this makes the series incredibly fun, and kind of stupid, yet giving you food tips to try and keep it grounded in reality. Kind of. Maybe I'll someday get the chance to try food so good that my clothes will explode off me in orgasmic bliss. Oh. I'm die. Thank you. Forever. Our next course, Otherworldly Izakaya Nobu. This is another that had my stomach gurgling the entire read-through in anticipation for each meal. In the medieval city of Idarike exists a Japanese-style pub called a Nobu. However, this pub is literally out of this world. Wait. Is this an isekai? Are we talking about an isekai series? Because we all know those are the devil. Kind of an isekai. Kind of. But I really wouldn't consider it one as such. Perhaps a reverse isekai. The customers of this Nobu are of course the medieval customers. Soldiers, a tax collector, princesses, for example. They delight themselves in getting away and trying out some of these unique foods. It's an interesting premise, and I think one that may relate to Western readers a lot more than some other series in this video might do. Especially if you haven't really tried Japanese cuisine before. From chicken karaage to kaisendon, it really goes in on those meals you'd find in a traditional Japanese pub. And it really works for it. It works so much, to the point that every time I read a volume of this, I just can't enjoy normal food anymore. I feel like good artwork is important for a good food manga. If a series can have you almost drooling at the pages for the food, you know it's going to be a good time. Definitely one that if you want to relax and have a beer with, it's worth it. An underrated gem, I would say. Now I feel that we've looked at otherworldly Izakaya Nobu, it's time to look at another title with a very, very similar premise. This one, however, is a light novel. We have Restaurant to Another World.
You mean I've got to read it with words and visualise it without any pictures? Using my brain? What kind of rip-off is this?
Honestly, it really works. Very similar to Izakaya Nobu, this particular title focuses on a restaurant that links with another world. I honestly love this one as a light novel, and I imagine the manga counterpart is also fantastic too. Each chapter usually focuses on a different protagonist and a mysterious door that appears in select locations around the world, often in their time of need.
I always thought of it much like the Doctor's TARDIS, only with yummy food on the other end of the door, as opposed to, well, death.
Restaurant to Another World excels at triggering your imagination. If you've had the dishes before, then being able to imagine these is a huge help. But even if you haven't, I feel you can use the descriptions enough to imagine them so. Compared to Izakaya, the menu is a lot bigger, the owner being able to make almost anything, which expands into sweets, desserts, beers, sake and cuisine around the world. I think this works rather well as it takes a lot of liberties, but it rarely feels like it's too out there. One of the things I loved about this one is the varied customers that come into the restaurant. The restaurant will receive customers such as warriors, heroes, adventurers, princesses, halflings, fairies, lizard men, even dragons into the restaurant. Everyone is hungry and it's the restaurant's job to serve up a fine dish.
I've got to admit, I really longed for the food for this one. I read this at the end of lockdown, so it was quite difficult having to wait until I could actually go to a Japanese restaurant and satisfy my craving that this series provided.
Next up, we have Beauty and the Feast.
Tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme, Beauty and the Feast.
This is one of those series that promises a good food time and then slaps you with a random other story that involves a young widow feeding the high schooler next door. The series presents itself as a woman getting her zest for life once again through the meal she cooks from the bottomless stomach of a neighbour. This one was okay. When I look at food series, I consider how good the food was, and if it's light on the food, it needs to stand up to make up for it. This one, it didn't really impress me whatsoever, but it wasn't anything particularly bad. As it is, the food side of things is often just the widow, Shuko Yakumo, just going, oh, I need to cook this, and then doing so for the next door neighbour. You aren't really going to get your delicious recipes, nor are the mouth-watering food porn on the side. I think I would have been fine with the rest of the plot, but it really looks like they're going for the romance option, which is...
Blimey, there's a bit of an age difference there, isn't there?
If you want a similar series but with less focus on food, but okay with reading something, then may I suggest The Angel Next Door Spoiled Me Rotten. It is a very similar premise, only way more comfy and a lot more cuter. Speaking of uncomfortable, next up we have Toriko. And let's never mention that title ever again. Fortunately, we have another food-based shonen in
Yakitate, Japan?
This one was definitely my first look into the genre of food-based manga, and what I wanted to get into with. The question presented to us is the following: England, France, Germany. What common thread binds these nations together?
War.
If you answered with the word bread, you'd be correct. Yakitate Japan is the bread baking manga set in Japan, the world of rice and fish. A young boy discovers he has an incredible bread baking powers and sets out to create Japan, the national bread of the rising sun. As I mentioned before, this was my first sip of the food manga broth, and returning to it, I honestly loved it. It's super creative when it comes to the foundation, and you can see how titles such as Shokogeki no Soma have caught on and added upon this. I really like the mini challenges of having to bake a specific type of bread to appease certain people. Now, I have to admit I've only recently read volumes 1 and 2 of a 20 odd volume series, but what I have read I really enjoyed. I'm now trying to find space so I can read the entire thing before it becomes super hard to find and all out of print.
Did I mention that one of the main characters has a really cool afro?
Next up we have something sweet. Incredibly sweet. Mix it up a bit and add a dash of lightning and we have...
a mess?
Fortunately, Sweetness and Lightning is an absolutely fantastic title. A young teacher struggles with raising his daughter after the passing of his wife. Relying on ready meals, he eventually begins to pick up cooking with the help of one of his students, Kotori Ida. Now, I'm sure you guys have all seen that clip from Crunchyroll with the sharks. And that essentially is what this series is. A nice little mixture of sweet slice of life events with a bunch of cooking and cooking utensils added on. This is definitely a comfy manga, something which you guys know I absolutely love. It's one of those ones where you can just relax after a long evening and just enjoy. A lot of people have really recommended this one to me, and I'm really glad I did end up picking it up. Now, keeping in my digital collection, and next up we have What Did You Eat Yesterday?
Chips, I think. And by which I mean chips, not crisps, America.
This is a food series that really worked for me. It focuses on a middle-aged gay couple, Shiro Kake and Kenji Yabuki, both living in Tokyo. Shiro is a serious lawyer while Kenji is a cheerful hairdresser. This series is the prime example of a food series that also really does everything outside of the food rather well. Each chapter usually presents us with a theme, either domestic life, workplace humour or LGBT rights in Japan. On the back of this, Shiro usually buys food and prepares a meal that fits the general theme of the plot. It works rather well if you want either a slice of life, an LGBT title or even a food manga. I can't recommend this one enough. Definitely underrated.
So, Mr. Man, do you understand cooking a little bit more now? I'm getting there. I mean, where does food come from anyway? What?
Next up we have Silver Spoon, the farming manga. Definitely an essential part of the whole food process. A young man, Yugo Hachiken, decides to go to agricultural college thinking it'll be a lot easier. It certainly isn't, and this series chronicles his years in agricultural college. This series is, honestly, it's one of my favourites, and it does an amazing job at focusing on the farm life and the lives of not only Hachiken, but the farm stock he looks after too. It's brutally honest with itself, and it's definitely one of those titles that makes you think. It focuses on something we don't often look at, or even think about when it comes to our food. How much sacrifices people make just to bring food to our table. We forget that animals are taken from their mothers and slaughtered to make the meal that we eat. We see Hachiken come across a lot of things, and much like ourselves, has to make the choice on how he wants to go from there. Is it right, or is it wrong, or do you just don't care and eat it anyway? Fortunately, the series isn't actually preachy in how it's put out, and definitely leaves you to decide on how you want to get the feel on the back of it, giving you both sides of the argument rather than just the one. Ultimately, we have one of the greatest manga of all time here. Now, while we are on the topic of where our food comes from, next up we have a title that focuses on the hunting, killing and cooking with wild game. This is another one that has a manga adaptation, but I'm choosing to focus on the light novel. In this title, a young man finds himself isekai'd to another world. Wait, put down that sharp object, this is a unique one. He soon encounters a beautiful huntress named Aifa, and the two form an unlikely bond.
What is an unlikely bond anyway? I mean, most unlikely bonds usually 9 times out of 10 end up in romance or being best friends, which makes that a pretty likely bond at the end of the day.
Aifa is the last surviving member of her clan, and in order to survive, she has to hunt and eat the meat of her kills. Fortunately for her, Asuta Tsurumi, our Isekai champion, was previously a chef trainee, and what ensues is, that's right, cooking with the wild game. This series goes in depth with the cooking, and volumes will just be spent on a particular meal. It really works in this. Putting a chef in the world in which he has the know-how but doesn't have the tools, spices, or even the ingredients to make the food, we get something that really manages to shine.
Oh, and Aoife, she is easily the best girl to not yet receive an anime adaptation. Over to you, boffins.
Of course, if you want something that involves wild game but don't want to read a filthy isekai, then why not try Golden Kamuy? Now, I've spoken about this title at great lengths, going as to say it's my favourite violent seinen, but man, the food aspect of this series is really good too. An ex-soldier teams up with an Ainu girl in order to find a treasure, taking them far across the Hokkaido wilderness. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I could write for ages about the narrative in this series, but I know you guys are all here for the food. And Golden Kamuy really delivers. Because of the setting, we have a ton of wild game, from rabbits to whales to seals, and of course, squirrel brains. Not only does Golden Kamuy bring absurd animals to the table, it makes them look just gosh darn tasty. I never thought a series that involves skinning prisoners would be so competent as a food or cooking manga, but Golden Kamuy really manages it, to the point that people will say it's all about the cooking, while the rest of the story is just supplementing it. It's enough to make you go out and want to hunt on your own.
Yummy, yummy, hot English!
Do you want the great outdoors but want something a little less dangerous and significantly less murdery? Well, Laid Back Camp has got you covered. My favourite seinen manga, and of course it's another food one. Although I would say this is one where I would say the food is simply an extra part of the series, and not necessarily the main focus. However, there is a ton of food in here that makes me want to talk about it anyway. Plus, it's got its own cookbook, so it's obviously doing something right.
It's almost as if I made an entire list and a video just so I could talk about one specific series.
Laid Back Camp is the most comfiest manga I've ever read. One that if I was in so much pain, a doctor could prescribe it to me and put me in an internal state of relaxment. It's all about camping, winter camping to be exact. Laid Back Camp follows a group of girls who enjoy nothing more than winter camping and travel the country trying different campsites, and they'll either try the local cuisine or cook their own food around the campfire, all comfy cozy like. Campfire cooking focuses on things like curry ramen, hot pot, pasta. It focuses on the ordinary, the simple meals you'll do on your own, and how there's nothing quite like going on holiday and unwinding and sharing food with a few friends. It's comfort food and it really works for it. To supplement this, it adds a ton of regional food from around the country, from yakiniku, kalbi, teriyaki, Kansai style sukinaki. For the foodies, it's a real treat, as personally it really opened my eyes to the different styles of food out there, region to region. Of course, if that's too comfy and you want something a little bit more monstrous, then next up we have the manga Delicious in Dungeon. When a group of adventurers are attacked by a dragon deep in a dungeon, they quickly discover they're one member short. Eager to go back, they set out without any provisions and coin to speak of. However, they come up with a cunning plan.
They decide to eat the monsters.
So now we have slimes, walking mushrooms, living armour, basilisks, and almost any fantasy monster you can think of now on the menu. And the series somehow manages to pull this absurd idea while also giving us a genuine good dungeon crawler title. It's literally eat or be eaten, but I personally loved how the series tried to ground things as realistically as possible. This isn't necessarily a case of boiling ramen and shoving a spider into it. No, most if not all of the monsters have real world counterparts, allowing the recipes to be somewhat usable. I'd genuinely be interested to see a cookbook compiling these and listen to the counterparts. I remember when I was in Japan I went to the Monster Hunter bar and they did quite a good job of making things look as authentic as possible. I also know there's a Dragon Quest bar out there which I hope to someday manage to go to. Maybe somewhere, someplace, there's a content creator out there who actually makes meals from monsters or weird insects maybe. If only. Now, of course, eating all of this food, you may find yourself needing to go onto a diet.
Oh man.
Fortunately, we have Plus-Sized Elf, the food manga that will keep you fit with the power of exercise. And ecchi.
2 of your 5 a day.
Monster girls are real and living among us. Unfortunately, the door between the two worlds requires you to be the same shape as when you originally passed through. Is this a problem? Well, if you eat a ton of fast foods, it certainly will be. A young elf finds herself overweight and unable to return to her own world. The reason? Well, she's addicted to fries. So it's time to work out and slim down to travel back to her own world.
Wait a minute. So you're saying if I want to be isekai to another world, I need to stop eating the junk food? Interesting.
Plus-Sized Elf is part food, part workout, whole ecchi in appearance. It blends rather well, a fun little romp that shows the dangers of overeating and fun, exciting ways to combat it. It's not the best tool in the shed, but it's easily a fun little manga for what it is.
Plus it has tons and tons and tons of ecchi.
I suppose we can't really talk about food without talking about the one, the only, Oishinbo. A title that I can admit that I wasn't really aware of until I started investigating for this particular video, but I'm really glad I checked it out. It's a long-running title with around 111 volumes. Now, this is simply a drama about a journalist going to eat food. There's no exploding claws, no ecchi elves, no monsters or dragons, not even any camping as far as I'm aware. Most stories just revolve around going to a restaurant and enjoying some good food, while trying to make things a little bit more interesting for the viewer by looking at historic facts and the background behind a lot of the foodstuffs in each chapter. Of course, with this title being so many volumes, the series in the West was compacted into best of editions for ourselves, with Viz publishing them in 2009 and 2010. I believe some of these volumes are sadly out of print, but they aren't too difficult to find. I'd recommend checking them out if you can do so. Each of the Western volumes covers a dedicated topic, from Japanese cuisine to sake to sushi or ramen and gyoza. It covers just about everything you want in terms of cuisine from the East. Each chapter usually either teaches us how to make the food itself, or even just gives us some tips and tricks on how to improve your experience. I think the blurb on the back sums this one up fantastically. Allow me to read. Serious yet comical, exhaustively detailed yet endlessly entertaining, Oishinbo is a fascinating, addictive journey throughout the world of cooking and food culture. It's one that if you love food manga, you owe to yourself to check it out.
And that is cooking manga. Now I'm going to use the power of manga and my knowledge of cooking manga to make an absolute beautiful meal. Let's see how we go, shall we?
最近流行りのはーちゃまクッキン見た目はゴミでも中身は美味しい最近流行りのはーちゃまクッキン友達に見せたら友達減るはーちゃまクッキン好きになるはーちゃまクッキン好き